Imagine working all day lifting weights, and when you finally get home exhausted, the only enjoyment you find in life is playing a virtual reality game. They say that whoever completes this game will gain unlimited wealth. Finally, when he manages to beat the game and more than 1 million lands in his bank account, he goes to sleep happily. But when he wakes up, the world has been invaded by monsters. The game has become reality, and he is the only one who knows everything about it and is determined to hack the system. The story begins on a beautiful morning with a clear sky. Someone is wearing virtual reality glasses, breathing heavily and sweating profusely. Inside the game, he receives congratulations for completing the final test, as he is the only one to finish the game. Happily, he asks if he really finished everything. While a pixelated game screen is displayed, someone mentions a scam game. He explains that this is what the VR game Prophecy Online was called. It was truly an impressive VR experience. Immersive and action-packed, compatible with high resolutions like 16K. It was an open-world online RPG where players could feel, smell, and hear things. This was Prophecy Online. The game promised that anyone who managed to complete it would receive unlimited wealth that couldn't be spent even in 10,000 years. At the time, no one believed in such a reward from the game. He admits that he was one of those people, simply enjoying the game while it asked for money and things like that. Endo says that all changed that day, remembering when someone told his team to take a break. He was at his workplace as usual, asking if they would be clearing debris in the afternoon. After failing to find jobs, he began working part-time as a construction worker, trapped in a routine of working hard under the sun and getting scolded by older colleagues. Suddenly, Endo receives a message on his phone from the Prophecy Online administration. Noticing it's a message from the game, he wonders if he hadn't turned off email notifications. In the message, they congratulate him for achieving first place in the beta test, saying the rewards would be deposited into his account. Smiling, Endo questions if they really still send out these scam emails, saying he'll check his account. He looks at his phone and saying it's impossible that they actually deposited anything in his bank. Surprisingly, they had deposited 1 million yen for him. A man approaches him, saying he'll need his help after the break. Concerned, the man comes closer, touching his shoulder, asking if he's feeling unwell. Endo simply starts running, laughing wildly, leaving his colleague on the ground asking where he's going. Running with high hopes, the player wonders if this is real and if he can make money from the game. He questions whether the reward that couldn't be spent in 10,000 years is real, which makes him throw himself fully into the game. This game was ruthless and unforgiving, using its players as sacrifices. The tower's guardian would destroy defeated users along with their data. In the dungeon, the tower's exit was always random. And the best part of all this exploration, they felt the same pain as the characters when they took damage, always confronting the real fear of death, making many players quit. Endo earned just enough to cover his expenses through a part-time job. However, to play more, he went into debt, taking loans from loan sharks and banks. Now he had no choice but to wait for those unlimited assets that couldn't be spent in 10,000 years. Going back to when he finally completed the game, they simply congratulate him, saying the real reward is his experience. With that exhausted, he begins to take off his VR. Completely disbelieving, he wonders if he actually did it. Dropping everything, he rushes to his phone, anxious for the reward. Clicking on the email sent by the Prophecy Online team, they were announcing that they had recently reached their goal, and for that reason, Prophecy Online would be discontinued. Angry, Endo wonders what will happen to his rewards, while he reads the game's thanks to all its sponsors. Feeling unwell, he ends up dropping his phone to the ground, lamenting while his phone remains broken on the floor. Kneeling on the ground, Endo wonders if they will properly reward him now that he has completed the game. The day remains sunny, the neighborhood calm, as if his problems affected no one else. As he walks toward his bed, he tries to convince himself that since it's a large sum of money, it might take time to transfer. Endo lies down exhausted on his bed, saying he'll check tomorrow. The next day, looking at his phone, he admits that nothing else came in besides the 1 million yen, and that he should have given up. After these events, a week passes. He hears a loud noise and wonders what's happening so early. Looking at his phone, Endo realizes the sound isn't coming from it. That's when he looks up and sees a system window. In front of him are notifications saying that the ice trial failed and Moscow was destroyed. Next would be the Earth trial. With a time limit of 43 days, if they failed, the test site would be annihilated, now being Japan. He looks at everything in confusion, not understanding what's happening. On the TV, terrified journalists inform the public of Moscow's current state. While monsters completely ravage the city, the Russian government declares there is no hope of survivors. Not knowing what kind of creatures these are, journalists announce they seem to be dragons. A helicopter observes the monsters from above. The journalist aboard reports that a similar situation is about to occur in Japan according to the gathered information. The warden states that many say this is a disaster coming from a game called Prophecy Online, being completely similar. A geologist says the only possible cause of a disaster on this scale would be the movement of tectonic plates, not monsters. As a monster opens its mouth toward the helicopter, the journalist asks if it's trying to aim at them. Someone screams desperately, ordering them to get out of there and return, but unfortunately, there's no response. The terrified presenter begins to shout the journalist's name, asking if she can hear him. The specialist, horrified by the scene, says that this could never happen in the plate movement. While running to his balcony, the protagonist says there's no doubt about it. He confesses that even in this crazy situation, he managed to remain calm. With his extreme calm, only one thought crossed his mind. Elsewhere, there, a woman who was trying to learn how the system worked. Pressing the main event button. Endu also presses this button, realizing the time limit is 43 days and the test location is Japan with 0 progress. He remembers the game's message saying his experience would be priceless. The protagonist assumes the priceless assets mentioned by the game were his experience. After all, he was the only one who completed it. Suddenly, after a long time, his door opens. All stylish, the young man steps out convinced. With a sly grin, he says he'll now get his money. As he runs, he remarks that with the game becoming reality, there will be intense competition for spots and experience points. Still running fast, he notices the nearest dungeon is just ahead of him. Endo hurries toward a large building. Many people are running and panicking, asking how they should escape since the buses and trains are out of service. Anxious and in a rush, he keeps running. Unexpectedly, someone angrily shouts at him to stop. The man steps in front of him, leaving the protagonist surprised. The man asks Endu if he's just going to ignore his reminders and leave. Looking at the man, he realizes it's one of the loan sharks chasing him. The loan shark says he was on his way to Endu's house and orders him to turn around. He throws a cigarette at Endu's face. A year ago, while the protagonist was inside a dungeon, an ad appeared. There was a company offering 200,000 yen interest-free to anyone who passed their selection, but they wanted 50% of all rewards. Endu thought it was a great offer, as he'd get the money interest-free and only pay back after completing the game. However, after spending the 200,000 yen, he was told he didn't pass the selection, so he'd need to pay 50% interest within 10 days. He remembers a time when a gun was pointed at him. From that point, Endu began taking loans from banks to pay off his debts. But when he tried to pay the debt, they brushed him off, hoping his interest would accumulate. Smiling, the man asks if the protagonist has the money to pay off the loan. Irritated, Endu looks at the loan shark, asking how he could pay if they wouldn't take his calls. The man questions if that's true, saying that people who don't want to pay always come up with excuses, calling him despicable. Still smiling, the loan shark says he's lucky to be there for other reasons. He asks if Endu hasn't been playing that game, Prophecy Online. The man mentions that the current state of the world is identical to the game's. Grabbing Endu by his shirt, he asks if he knows anything, and if he does, he better spill everything. The protagonist orders the man to get his filthy hands off him. Even angrier, the man asks Endu if he knows who he's talking to. The protagonist then tells Takuo he'll give him a useful piece of information. Activating his skill, Novice's Fist, making the loan shark step back. Takuo boosts his fist's power by 50% and starts punching the man. The strength of his blows is so intense that the loan shark is thrown against a traffic sign. Looking at the man lying on the ground, he says that from now on, he's in charge. Seeing Takuo unconscious and bleeding, Endo remarks that apparently the loan shark can't cure him. He just leaves Takuo there and continues running toward his goal. Watching from inside a car, a man in a black hood comments that maybe these are game abilities. With his face partially covered, he says he didn't expect to find such an experienced person so soon. Smiling, the man says that soon law and order will collapse, making things more interesting. The protagonist arrives at a place called the Goat's Sanctuary. Unexpectedly, something catches his attention. Noticing a car, he wonders if someone arrived before him. Endu begins descending into the deep, dark dungeon, still moving through the corridors, searching for something. Suddenly, he smells a strong scent of blood. Surprisingly, dozens of lizard men lie dead in front of him. The same hooded man and his group notice that apparently someone else has arrived. Looking at Endu, he asks if the protagonist is also a prophecy player. A bit annoyed, Endu asks if the group did all that. The hooded man says those were high-level monsters, and without him, the protagonist would be dead. Endu starts questioning whether the lizards are truly high-level, remembering that their level was the lowest of the low. Taking off his hood, he comments that it seems Endao has no friends, asking if he'd like to become one of his subordinates. He says the protagonist will have to hand over half of everything he earns, but in return, he'll protect him since he's very strong. Everyone behind him is charmed by his kindness. Endu apologizes, saying he prefers to go solo. Pointing ahead, he asks if they'd be able to get past the boss. They're shocked at the thought. Talking to his group, the hooded man asks if it's worth killing Endu after they finish off the boss. Making everyone nervous, the man says the fewer people know about the game's information, the better. He says that's his decision and anyone who doesn't agree with him will face an accidental death. Suddenly, everyone feels a certain fear and becomes uneasy. The man informs his subordinates that the boss here is the Ember Goat, so he doesn't want the protagonist to be the last one to attack it. There were only 5 minutes left until the door opened. Some of them approach Endao, who is surprised. A girl, along with 2 men, moves toward him, a bit nervous. Smiling, he asks if they're going to try to stop him. A bit anxious, they begin to say he's right and that he should stay right there. He thinks of himself that he could easily throw them out, but this time he'll let them go. The door opens as the protagonist thinks it won't be too late, and he'll defeat the boss after most of them have been killed. After the remaining time for the door to open runs out, it finally opens. He simply takes a juice from his inventory and leans against the wall, waiting for his moment. Hearing the gates close, he looks into the boss room, wondering how far they'll manage to get. As they enter, the leader assumes it was convenient that Endu didn't go in with them. The girl mentions that maybe the protagonist understood their intentions to kill him, but the leader says he's not smart enough to notice that. In front of them is a large hall, completely empty except for a single light coming from a crack in the ceiling. Hitting the shield of one of his subordinates, he orders the guy to do his job. The guy says that with his shield, the boss won't be a problem while addressing the leader as Sir Light. A candle emitting purple flames was burning and a wall sconce. response. Suddenly, a strong wind strikes them, leaving everyone confused. Surprisingly, a large fire tornado forms right in front of them. The leader, filled with extreme fear, starts questioning what kind of scenario this is. Interrupting his thoughts, a large paw emerges from the flames. That's when he realizes this is actually the Hellfire Goat. The monster was a mix between a goat, a wolf, a horse, and other animals. The goat lets out a loud scream, sending shockwaves and fire spreading in all directions. Many warriors scream as another devastating attack strikes them. Light himself, along with some of his subordinates, is thrown back against the entrance door. He curses, wondering how everything ended up like this, with the monster stopping right in front of him. A frightened girl asks what they should do now, and he angrily tells her to shut up and orders everyone to retreat. One of his subordinates shouts that the door is closed, and the leader says that's impossible, questioning what's going on. He starts yelling, ordering some of them to distract the creature, saying the shield should be able to block the monster's attacks. The man holding the shield tries to say something, but his leader ignores him, commanding him to do as he was told. The shield bearer positions himself in front of the creature, which raises its hammer. The man, completely overtaken by fear, holds the shield in front of him, but with no chance at all, he is crushed by the creature. His companions are utterly terrified and they start to flee. After the boss raises its hammer again, we can see the man lying lifeless on the ground. A strange creature picks up the man's shield with its fingers. Unexpectedly, it places it in its mouth. It begins chewing the shield as if it were nothing. They start saying that this is unbelievable since it was an epic level shield. Light concludes that everything is completely wrong after all. The monster they came to face is a low level one that everyone can handle. He says that this happened after the update. Before, it was a monster called the Hellfire Goat and no player could get past it. Trembling with fear, he reaches the conclusion that this world is based on the game's initial version. Light remembers that the protagonist is waiting outside and that maybe he can open the door. The leader begins banging on the door desperately, begging Endu to open it so they can split the reward. However, as expected, he receives no response. Annoyed, Light asks if the guy can hear him and orders him to open the door, but something passes very quickly and close to his body. When he looks back, Light sees the monster heading toward him, sweeping through all his subordinates until it reaches him. Once again, they are thrown far away, left completely injured. Looking at the monster, he says that with such ridiculous physical strength, soon they will all be annihilated. Opening the door, Endu asks if that was all he could manage after all that talk, saying that Light lacks the talent to be a leader. With a proud smile, our swindler looks at the monster. Even almost dead, the man still mentally curses him. He admits mentally that he'll use the protagonist to escape and starts calling his subordinates, ordering them to retreat. Endu makes the girl trip as he tells her it's not a good idea. With the girl fallen to the ground, she realizes the door is closing. The protagonist looks at the so-called leader. Light runs toward the door, mentally begging that at least he can get through. Suddenly, he starts screaming loudly as the door crushes his arm. The monster approaches the leader, calling him a noisy brat. As it prepares to deliver an attack, it says the boy is very irritating and that it will end his life right there. Light looks back, realizing the monster is coming toward him. Suddenly, a large amount of blood splatters across the room. Watching that terrifying scene, the girl and the man who had tried to stop the protagonist wonder what they're going to do against such a monster. Picking up the sword on the ground, Endu says that what they need to do is obvious. Raising the sword, he says that although Light was weak, he had a good sword, and that's enough for someone like him. The monster, once again preparing its hammer, asks if the protagonist is so eager to die. It strikes him with a powerful attack, sending fragments of stone flying in all directions. The protagonist appears on top of the monster, preparing to counterattack. Smiling, he asks the monster what it's talking about. In the blink of an eye, he manages to cut the monster in multiple places. The monster screams as its horns fall to the ground. Light's former subordinates look at the man, terrified by his level of strength. Calmly, Endu asks what they think. Once again, our swindler says that if they pay him 10 million yen, he might consider saving them. The frightened girl looks at him, not understanding if he's serious. Both the girl and her companion shout, asking if he's really demanding 10 million. He says that's correct and that he'll only charge 1 million per person. Annoyed, they begin to argue that no one would have that amount on hand and that he's just trying to take advantage of the situation. Endu says that if they don't have money, they should pay with their efforts, while asking if they really want to die so young. Then the hero states that they'll work for him, giving him 90% of everything they earn. The girl yells, telling him to stop treating them like fools, while her friend says even Light only charged 50%. As the monster rises behind them, Endu says that it seems there's nothing else to do. The monster stands up, even angrier, asking who dared to cut off its precious horns. It launches a massive fireball, yelling that they should die 1,000 times over. The girl casts a spell trying to shield herself. The protagonist jumps through the flames. Both are thrown far back by the force of the impact. Endu gently lands in front of them. With a smile, he says that apparently they managed to escape, but he wonders how long their luck will hold. With that, they both give up and agree to work for him, but they beg him to save them. He starts smiling, pleased with the outcome. He says it looks like they've struck a deal, while glancing at the monster and saying it's been a long time since he last defeated it. The monster, irritated, says it doesn't remember ever being defeated by someone like him. They begin asking what he's talking about, since the Hellfire Goat was supposed to have been removed before it was ever defeated. Without replying, Endu looks at the monster with determination. He recalls that before the update, he had defeated the monster once, and he confesses that he heard from some sources that the Hellfire Goat was transformed into the Blaze Goat. With just a single movement of his sword, the protagonist manages to deflect the monster's attack. The monster stares in confusion, unable to understand how he managed that. Both his subordinates look at him, wondering who Endu really is after all, stopping that creature so easily. The protagonist confesses to the monster that if its attack had hit him, he'd definitely be dead. But he adds its attacks aren't dangerous once you know the tricks. The monster keeps attacking while he dodges and blocks them all with relative ease. The monster grows increasingly frustrated, wondering how this is possible, while the protagonist leaps behind it. Brandishing his sword, Endu manages to strike the monster's eye, saying its patterns are exactly like in the game. As he steps away from the battle, the new subordinates notice he's pushing the monster back. They begin cheering him on, rooting for his victory. Annoyed, Endu tells them they're being too loud, prompting one of his subordinates to call him frustrating. Suddenly, a powerful attack passes close to Endu, leaving him surprised. Slamming its massive hammer into the ground, the monster says the protagonist's evasion skills are commendable, but it all ends here. With his back against the wall, the player realizes he's cornered. He asks the infernal goat if this was his plan all along, trap him. Ignoring his question, the monster asks if he has any last words. With a smile, the protagonist simply tells the monster to drop dead. After all, it can't even land a hit on him. Even more enraged, the monster says it will fulfill his wish as it summons flames around itself. It opens its mouth, concentrating a huge core of fire in the center. The subordinates begin to wonder what these black flames are. Endo explains that this is the flame that burns everything, capable of killing even a level 99 player instantly. It's an attack that incinerates the entire ground, leaving no escape route. This is the goat's ultimate move, its last hope. With a purple gleam in his eyes and a grin, he says it's no big deal. Endu says he's been waiting for this moment, activating his novice kick skill on the ground, adding just 50% of his strength, creating a bright flash at the spot where he stood. Skillfully, he jumps for the monster, saying that even though it's a powerful attack, it leaves the user completely defenseless. And besides, he adds, its mouth has nowhere near the strength of the rest of his body. Positioning himself on the ceiling to gain momentum, he says, in other words, this level 1 strength is enough to keep it closed, stabbing the monster's mouth from above downwards. The monster falls to the ground, desperately trying to open its mouth as the flames burn it from within. Endu is exhausted from the battle, explaining that once this ability is activated, it can no longer be contained. With that, there's nothing left for the monster to do but feel the flames burning through its entire body. He jumps back, creating some distance as he asks if the monster can withstand its own flames. A little further away, they watch as the monster is charred by its own attack. Looking at the monster, he bids it farewell. When the Hellfire Goat finally opens its mouth, it only manages to scream. After a while, the monster was completely charred. The system notifies that the unique boss, the Hellfire Goat, has been defeated, while the girl and the guy can hardly believe they're still alive. Looking at the protagonist, they notice he killed the boss without even a scratch. The system congratulates him, announcing that Endu was the first to defeat a unique boss. He's awarded the title of the First Slayer. This leaves him a bit confused, as he doesn't remember anything like this in the game. This title grants him an additional 50% damage when fighting a boss. Additionally, as an extra reward, he can choose his secondary occupation. The system asks if he wants to select his secondary occupation now, and he replies that he does. The system also explains that once his secondary occupation is chosen, it can no longer be changed. With determination, he chooses the occupation of Soulsmith. Endu extends his arm, resolute in his choice. Suddenly, a bright light surrounds his body. With a smile, he says that it looks like he's about to make a lot of money. Collecting the boss's drops, he finds a dagger and a key. The girl informs him that it's the key to the underground sewer. It's a great place to level up quickly and earn money. The man accompanying her says their main objective initially was the ultra-rare drop the boss had. Endu starts spinning the key on his finger. He explains that this item isn't that rare. In fact, the drop rate is 100% with the Hellfire Goat. They're horrified at how casually he treats an item that's so hard to acquire. Looking at the dagger, he assumes it was pure luck to have obtained it. Endu walks over to the rubble. As he points the blade, yellow and blue sparks begin to emerge from it. With just a downward flick of his hand, he slices one of the pieces of rubble in half. Both his subordinates stare in shock, asking what's up with that dagger. While remarking that it's still not good enough, he starts using his secondary occupation ability, hoping the required materials will be simple. Even though the term secondary occupation might sound optional, Endu explains it's actually the main thing. He explains that the Soulsmith occupation allows him to use small soul fragments to create or enhance something. It's the only occupation that allows him to reach the endgame. The protagonist activates his soul sight ability. Looking at the sword, he discovers that it can be awakened with a soul fragment from an F-type mage. Looking at the girl, he realizes she's a mage and that there won't be any consequences if he extracts the fragment by forming a contract. He admits he wishes he'd known that before agreeing to take 90% 50% of their earnings. As he thrusts his dagger into the ground, he says there's still something he can use. Looking at the two, he asks if they didn't want that key to be able to level up. Confused, they ask if he's really okay with it. Endo says that in exchange, they'll have to give him all the items on this list, slightly reducing the fee they'll need to pay. Both are ecstatic and begin thanking him. The protagonist tells them they don't need to thank him. After all, the more they earn, the more he profits, fulfilling the extraction conditions. He successfully acquired a soul fragment from an F-type mage. With the materials in hand, Endo activates the soul smith ability once again. He commands the sword to awaken, and it begins to glow radiantly. As fragments swirl in a tornado of power, the sword's blade turns purple. Raising the dagger in front of him, he notices he's gained a new skill called Soul Slash. The hero activates the skill to test it. While his subordinates look on, terrified, he slashes forward, cutting through everything in his path. The attack is so powerful that it slices through the warehouse, revealing a forest beyond. Both subordinates gaze at the massive crater in awe of such strength. Everyone stares at the power released with a single movement of the dagger. They collapse to the ground, wondering if a human could possess such power. Looking at the dagger, he comments that this seems to be its limit. As he looks at the girl, Endo says that he has a weapon and a minimal amount of skills, but should be ready for the next step. The protagonist simply stops in front of the girl, scaring her. Quickly, Ruby covers her face, thinking he's going to kill her. To her surprise, Endo simply walks past her, leaving her confused as to what's happening. He crouches in front of the bodies of his subordinates, former companions, and begins to pray. Ruby watches him, captivated, wondering if Endo is mourning the dead players. However, in reality, the protagonist just wanted the wallets of the extras. The little thief starts grinning, saying they had quite a bit of money on them. Both conclude that he's more dangerous than the Hellfire Goat. Somewhere, numerous black feathers fall from the sky. Around a shrine, several crows are flying as someone stands before the gate. It was Endo, observing the place. He calmly approaches a well. As he descends the stairs, the protagonist mentions that beneath this well, there's a large number of monsters. Usually, they'd only be challenged by a group of 3 or more people, but Endo says that this doesn't apply to him after all. He has the goat dagger. Upon reaching the bottom of the stairs, he looks around. Suddenly, he hears the sound of a coin flying toward him. He quickly slices it in half, avoiding contact. Positioning himself for battle, the player raises his dagger in front. Noticing something, he glares ahead, irritated. Unexpectedly, 3 men appear, asking if there's a new visitor. The man with a bloodthirsty look tells the protagonist that this place belongs to them. Pointing his blade at the men, he questions who decided that. The man says that whoever arrives first wins, asking if that isn't the game's rule. One of the men says they'd let him use the area if he pays a fee. Realizing these men are like him, Endo asks what the price would be. The man says he'll charge him 50,000 yen per hour, since even so, the protagonist would still be making a profit. He hands the money to the men, who thank him and inform him that he has 1 hour starting now. Going deeper into the dungeon, he enters the wolves' cavern. Suddenly, the player hears a howl. A white wolf quickly runs toward him. Before he realizes it, he notices he's surrounded by dozens of wolves. He comments that these are diamond wolves, mid-level monsters that are great for earning money, and that this cave is the only place they appear in groups. He says he could use the soul blade, but it's better to save it for now. In an instant, all the wolves leap at him. Skillfully, he charges at them. In the blink of an eye, he slashes through all the wolves. He continues killing them, walking through the pack and decapitating them. After finishing them off, he simply stops his attack. He sits among all the corpses to catch his breath. Smiling, he says that, as expected, it didn't yield much. Unexpectedly, one of the men who confronted him at the entrance appears behind him, preparing to strike. With relative ease, the protagonist manages to block his enemy's attack. Brandishing his dagger, he counters. Surprisingly, the man dodges his attack. However, the attack hits the top of the cavern, causing a strong explosion. His enemy, with a cut on his forehead, admits that was dangerous. The protagonist notes that the man managed to dodge his attack even with difficulty, showing his combat experience. The player tells the big guy that apparently he likes to play dirty. After all, he waited for him to kill him monsters and lower his guard. With a manic grin, his opponent says he loves it. The protagonist concludes that their real objective is to wait for other players to gather equipment, then kill and rob them. Overhearing their conversation, the group's leader says that it seems he figured it out. Smiling, the protagonist says this is a secret spot used by all cheers, so it'd be strange if they were the only ones there. Endo says that if they wanted to deceive him, they should have at least planned a fake round. The player admits to himself that, in reality, he only noticed this after seeing their weapons. He notes that the big guy is using a kind of knuckle duster, the famous rocket punches. It's a risky move, but greatly enhances the speed of its user. He also mentions the skinny guy's weapon, a sword that cuts through vibrations. As for the ring on the leader's finger, that's truly a problematic item. The leader apologizes for the misunderstanding and says he'll even give him compensation for the trouble, reaching into his coat. He throws hundreds of coins for the protagonist. Endo is startled as the coins fall, but he's also extremely angry inside, saying the guy is throwing 10,000 yen like it's nothing. As the man's ring glows, he says his hand slipped and asks the protagonist to pick them up for him. Noticing the trap, the protagonist asks if it's really worth making his enemy kneel. He explains that the ring's ability causes small explosions with coins and wonders if his enemies are underestimating him. As he tosses his dagger upward, the protagonist says they can't return alive after hunting someone of a higher rank. As the 3 gather in front of him, they ask if Endo forgot it's 3 against 1. While preparing his dagger, the protagonist says that even together, it wouldn't be worth 1 yen. The leader, even angrier, curses at him, glaring fiercely. The man snaps his fingers, activating the explosion ability. A large blast occurs. The leader orders his subordinates to cut him limb by limb until he's dead. The big guy appears behind him, positioning himself to strike. With some difficulty, the protagonist manages to dodge his attack. Something catches his attention while he's still midair. It was the skinny guy, saying he isn't very good at holding back. The protagonist manages to block his enemy's sword while his companion lands a series of punches to his back. However, to everyone's surprise, the player makes a single move, throwing both of them away. Looking at the leader, the protagonist says that apparently the deal not to bother him for 50,000 yen was broken, so he'll charge them with interest. He unleashes several attacks toward the leader. While smiling, he says he'll pay him back with interest, but in explosive coins. From above, we can see that the protagonist is in the center, raising his dagger, with 2 of his enemies on the ground and the leader still standing. The long-haired one activates his explosive coin ability again. Endu runs, dodging the coins as he moves. Without wasting time, the skinny guy attacks him from above. With a certain ease, he manages to block the skinny guy's furious attack. However, his fury turns to fear as he sees his sword breaking. Without even giving him a chance to understand what's happening, the protagonist strikes him again. The leader, seeing the scene, wonders if the protagonist's dagger really is a rare item. While Endu fights against the 3 of them, the leader assumes this is still within expectations, and that, in any case, they won't be defeated by someone like him. Quickly, the player tries to dodge the explosions. Again, Endu gets angry as they throw money around like it's worthless. The big guy appears behind him once more, trying to strike him. The protagonist dodges the attack, causing a huge explosion. The explosion's force is so strong that even his allies need to shield themselves. The player's blade spins in the air as if announcing his defeat. The big guy starts celebrating, saying it was a great challenge, while his friend tells him he needs to learn to hold back. The skinny one, holding his sword, admits that the visitor was indeed strong. The long-haired one crouches to pick up the dagger, saying that no matter how good a weapon is, if its user isn't alive, it's worthless. Suddenly, Endu activates his soul restriction ability, chaining both the skinny guy and the big guy, leaving only the leader, who is terrified. Both warriors start screaming in pain as the chains tighten around them. The concerned leader starts calling out their names. Emerging from the mist, the player explains that he used his soulsmith ability to cause unparalleled pain. The enraged leader charges at the protagonist, wielding the goat dagger. Before he can even get into position, the protagonist grabs him. Looking at him, Endu calls him slow. Furious, the man says he won't lose no matter what. He jumps back, unbuttoning his coat, sending numerous coins flying. Confidently, the leader commands him to be amazed. But now even angrier, the protagonist reactivates his soul restriction ability. In the blink of an eye, his opponent is completely chained. He tries to scream as some of the chains tighten around his neck. The long-haired man doesn't understand why his ability won't activate, and Endu explains that with a significant level difference, he can nullify the enemy's power. Still bound, he asks what level difference he's talking about since he's already level 7. As he tightens the chains further, the player tells him he's done well for a beginner. Looking at them, Endu tries to figure out the conditions required to obtain their soul fragments. The big guy's condition was to satisfy his hunger, the skinny guy's was to introduce him to his older sister, and the leader's was to genuinely fear him. With a menacing look, the protagonist says that the leader's condition is one he can fulfill right now. As he strangles the leader begins to beg for his life. Holding his dagger, the player says he would be only one at a disadvantage if he left him alive. The terrified man, in extreme fear, starts asking what he means. Endu says he'll sell parts of his body since there are always people willing to buy. Once again, our scammer says that the interest rate on the 50,000 yen was pretty high. The skinny guy starts shouting, saying the protagonist really does seem like the type to do such a thing. He feels offended, saying there's no way a freelancer like him could have connections in the black market. Endu says that if they don't like that idea, they should think of another way to make money. In complete terror, the leader begs for his life as tears stream down his face. A system notifies that Koki fears him deeply and that the conditions have been fulfilled, granting him a mage's soul fragment. After that, the protagonist simply releases them from their chains. They collapse to the ground, gasping for air. The protagonist hands them several contracts, ordering them to sign. They're all outraged by the fact that they'll have to give up 90% of their profits and still obey his every command. With a bloodthirsty look, Endu glares at them, asking if they have any complaints. Terrified, they both answer that they have none. He says that from now on, the 3 of them are his subordinates, and that if they ever think of betraying him, the operating table will be their fate. Unexpectedly, Endu asks them to lead him to the real leader. They're all utterly horrified, asking how he figured it out. He explains that the items they're using couldn't have been obtained by weaklings like them, obviously meaning someone else is behind them, and asks if he's right. Kaki starts begging, saying that if the boss finds out, he'll kill them. Placing his foot on his subordinate's head, Endu asks if he's going to betray his former boss or have his organs transplanted. Trembling, the skinny guy starts muttering something. Suddenly, he starts crying and running, saying he wants neither, leaving the big guy shocked. The player points his finger at the man, asking if he really thinks he can escape. With that, the soul restriction chains grab the man once again. His 2 companions are utterly terrified by his total control, as their friend is suffocated, and he say they'll lead him to their boss. But Endu still demands all their weapons and money. The protagonist notes that the security in this world is terrible. Even the game's security was better. With a grin, Endu laughs, saying there's probably no one left who could hurt him now. In his status status window, we can see that the protagonist is on a completely different level. At dusk, we can see a circus. Like any circus, there's a spot where the tightrope walker performs, along with rings of fire and other things. Then we're shown someone being beaten by a man. The person being attacked falls to the ground, bleeding. Some people inside a sort of cell say that he'll be next and express their sorrow. A man with a bloody face tells the person being beaten that he didn't even complete the task. The man asks if he won't apologize to the boss. Another man in the cell shouts, begging for him to stop, saying that the person will die. With a sadistic smile, he says the person should just die and that they're all causing the boss a lot of grief. Someone holding a whip asks why they're talking about him. The sadistic man starts stuttering, calling him boss. The boss, with a clown-painted face, asks his subordinate if he's done disciplining him. Helping the man on the ground, the boss says that if he had broken a bone, it would take a long time to recover. He tells his subordinate that, no matter how incompetent they may be, he shouldn't simply break them. Trembling and sweating, the sadistic man starts apologizing to the boss. With tears in his eyes, the beaten man thanks the boss, saying that next time he'll definitely. However, his thanks are cut short as the clown lashes out with his whip. In an instant, the man is struck in the face with an extremely powerful blow. He keeps whipping the man, saying that this way is better since it doesn't break bones but shreds flesh. Still beating him, the boss says that not even animal welfare organizations would help him if he remains this lazy. Suddenly, someone says that they've returned, catching the boss's attention. With a sinister look, the boss remarks that they're back too early. The long-haired one says they need to report in as they're in no condition to continue the operation. The clown notices his hand and realizes the ring is gone. He becomes extremely angry as he looks at Cookie. The boss demands to know where the ring he lent him is, saying it's worth more than his own life. The long-haired one bows, apologizing and saying they were robbed by a man who was practically a monster. Ignoring his explanation, the boss just attacks him. Cookie falls to the ground from the impact. Furious, the boss says that even with so few people in his guild, he shouldn't be surrounded by such incompetent scum. Both of Cookie's companions confess that most of them quit because of his abuse of power. The boss says there's only one job left that Cookie can do and calls his other subordinate Locke. The clown orders him to bring Johnny. Suddenly, a large white tiger's paw appears. The animal moves towards the long-haired man. The animal growls, looking at him furiously. Stammering in fear, he begins to beg the boss not to do this, saying that he's been loyal since the beginning. With a smile, the clown gives the order for Johnny to feast. The large tiger opens its mouth toward Cookie, who remains paralyzed with fear. Suddenly, someone appears, swinging from one of the circus apparatuses. It's the protagonist who saves his new subordinate by kicking the tiger away. With his incredible strength, he manages to throw the animal far. Concerned for his animal, the boss looks at it while shouting its name. The player, with a smile, apologizes but says he couldn't let him kill his source of income. The boss rushes over to his animal, asking if it's okay and saying it must have been very frightened. Desperate, Cookie asks why Endu took so long to show up, but the swindler only complains that there wasn't much to loot. Not surprisingly, the boss attacks him from behind with his whip. However, to his surprise, the protagonist cuts his whip even with his back turned. In the blink of an eye, the boss is left without his whip, which falls to the ground in pieces. Now a bit nervous and afraid, the clown asks who he is. As his blade glows purple, Endu says he's the new boss of those guys. Locke, outraged, begins to ask where their gratitude for the boss is. The men ask why they should be grateful, and they only obeyed him out of fear. But now the protagonist is scarier than he is. Staring him down, the protagonist asks if he hurt him. Pointing to the other men who were caged, Endu says that if they sign a contract, he'll protect them from this weakling. The man who was just assaulted asks if he'll take them out of this hell. With a malicious smile, the protagonist says he promises. The player announces to everyone that he'll only take 50% of everything they earn. This makes his other subordinates angry as he charged them 90%. Annoyed, he says it's because they tried to kill him. Trembling with rage, the clown asks if, besides hurting his animal, he also wants to steal his subordinates. His eyes glow purple as he vows to kill all 4 of them. Endu says they're in Japan and asks since when such barbaric behavior has been tolerated. Taking out an ID from his inventory, the clown says it's because he has this. It's a Guildmaster ID and a certificate from the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications. The protagonist is surprised to learn that he's a Guildmaster. He explains that the Japanese government grants guild leaders the authority to act above the law and conquer dungeons. Andre says that not even the police can lay a hand on him in Japan. Those with power face no consequences. With a grin, Endu asks if that means becoming a guild master would allow him to conduct shady business without consequences. The clown calls the protagonist a foolish man as he grabs a gun and explains that to become a guild master, he has to be at least rank B. Pointing his gun at the protagonist, the guild master says he'll die so he doesn't need to know anything else. The man starts shooting, saying he'll turn him into a sieve. Endu merely stares as the bullets fly toward him. The protagonist uses his ability called Soul Barrier. It's a barrier raised from level 25 using type E magical soul fragments. While continuing to shoot, the clown curses and praises him at the same time, calling Endu clever. The protagonist says that Russia used nuclear missiles during the ice test and still failed. He asks the guild master if he's never stopped to think about it. After all, there are many players, but none use firearms. Still shooting, the boss asks him not to approach. Suddenly, he receives a huge shock, causing him to drop the weapon. The barrier that was approaching finally reaches him, beginning to push him. Desperately, he forces himself against the barrier, trying to stop it. Still moving toward the man, the protagonist asks him to take a good look. While trying to hold back the barrier, he realizes he's being crushed. He is completely pressed against the wall, causing several cracks. The man starts spitting blood while Endu laughs. The former guild master falls to the ground, powerless, after the protagonist releases his barrier. Looking at the man, Endu says that abilities surpass weapons, and Andre shouldn't think he can defeat him with these toys. The former subordinates start saying that even the boss couldn't do anything against that man. With a smile, the protagonist asks if they want to make a deal with him and promises that if they agree, he will even let them get their revenge. They all agree to the contract as long as they can do whatever they want with the scoundrel. Lying on the ground, the master asks how he, a person without a license, could do this, and that the authorities wouldn't stay quiet. Endu says he doesn't care. After all, the man himself told him that power is everything nowadays. Still with his head down, the clown notices some footsteps approaching. When he lifts his head, he realizes that it's all of his subordinates. As the former subordinates beat up their boss, the player thinks about how much money he made today and that they'll give him much more. Looking at the system window, he says it's better to finish the test when people start to panic. He realizes that only a month is left, concluding that this is the perfect moment. At the headquarters of the player association, the rank certification exam is taking place. The protagonist goes to take the exam. He notices 3 people talking behind him. One of them says that if you're a B rank player or higher, you'll have a very high salary in the tens of millions of yen. His friend tells him not to get his hopes up since only 1% of the Japanese population is rank B and only 9 are rank A. They continue discussing while the protagonist just listens. Endo says that 2 weeks have passed since the game became real. The government offered a 100 million yen reward to whoever could end the trial, but as expected, the result was disastrous. That's why it's now mandatory to apply to the player association. If you don't participate and take the tests, you won't receive any rewards for it. While walking to the association, the protagonist thinks that a lot of money is involved and he wants a share, but someone is watching him from above. He realizes he's being observed and tries to find out who it is. Suddenly, an object flies toward him. With great ease, he dodges the attack. The people around start to get shocked, saying the traffic cone fell from the sky. It's Takuo, who calls out to him, saying that he had it good before. He shouts that the protagonist won't escape his debt anytime soon. The protagonist asks if the loan shark came to take the exam too. He says that a weak person who could be defeated with just one hit from the novice fist ability should give up on being a player. Convinced, Takuo says he's not the same anymore and that now he has the strongest class, Spearman. The protagonist starts laughing, saying that this class is only for amateurs who don't know what they're doing. The protagonist says that class can't keep up with the power inflation, and the loan shark asks what class he has. With a wicked look, Endu says his class is novice. The man laughs, saying that's the same as having no class. The player mentally says that his main class is indeed novice, but he doesn't need to mention his subclass. As he raises the traffic sign again, Takuo says he'll get revenge for the other day, and that this is the true power of a spearman. He begins to unleash several attacks for the protagonist. The protagonist just dodges all of them while closing the distance. The man, startled, asks how he can do that. Facing the loan shark, Endu says that he really didn't want trouble before the exam, but he can't do anything when the problem comes to him. Simply moving his arm, he throws the man into the air, causing panic all around. The loan shark screams desperately as he falls to the ground. Everyone looks at him, and the protagonist continues walking, saying it was self-defense. Inside a very luxurious place, the attendant informs him that the registration fee is 8,000 yen, which he thinks is extremely expensive. Sometime later, he's sitting, depressed for losing 8,000 yen, but suddenly someone approaches him. It's a girl who apologizes for the delay. With a smile, she says they'll now begin his rank certification exam. He was facing a large black rock. It emitted a strong purple light. Endu notices that the exam is apparently as they told him and asks the one if he needs to place his hand on it. He begins to extend his hand toward the large rock. As his hand gets close to it, several rays connect the two. He brings his hand even closer while the strong blue light is emitted. When his hand touches the rock, a massive explosion of light occurs, causing panic even in the assistant. There were several rays along with an extremely strong light emanating from the stone. Still startled by what she is seeing, the woman begins to wonder what this is. In another place, the woman, still surprised, calls his name. She says the result is in, and he is equivalent to rank A. Ender receives a document with his classification. A bit nervously, she says he probably knows this, but players can change classes. She begins to explain that he could be a master swordsman, a master mage, or an archbishop. He declines and says that even though he wants to, his class isn't available yet. Confused, the woman asks what class that would be, but the protagonist replies that he doesn't intend to share it. She informs him that to change classes, he will need a special item, and asks if he would like help from the association. Endu just coldly refuses. He asks if that's all she has to say. The woman, a bit nervous, asks if that wouldn't be problematic for him. The player questions her as to why she's asking that. She explains that he has more power than any rank A they've seen, but since he doesn't have a class, he will be downgraded to rank E. The woman informs him that rank E has many restrictions, like not being able to create his own guild, which would be a disadvantage for him. Endo says that the government loves to create useless rules, while mentally he thinks that all he needs to do is turn a subordinate into rank B. He remembers that only one class can clear this game, and he has no intention of changing until then. The protagonist asks if even rank E can receive the 100 million reward for clearing the test. She says says yes. The woman says she understands and that his registration will have to be issued as rank E. A little later, he was walking down the street while some people were holding up posters. They were guild members trying to recruit people who had just finished the test. The protagonist, with a smile, notices that people are really putting a lot of effort into this. Two girls say they are looking for rank D players and ask if he wants to join their guild. Endu informs them that he is rank E. The girls begin to lament for him, saying they understand. The protagonist notices that rank E players are being treated like pests, but he convinces himself that he doesn't care about any of this. Suddenly, his attention is caught by a man in a suit walking through the crowd. The man had an orange aura surrounding his body. His eyes also glowed orange as he stared intently at Endu. As he approaches, the man says it's a pleasure to meet him and asks if his name is Endu Ri. Suddenly, he hands Endu a card, saying that these are his details. It was a card for a guild called Genesis Wings. People were discussing if that was really the strongest guild, Genesis Wings, and if he was the Stinker. The protagonist asks what Stinker means, and the man awkwardly explains that it was his nickname in the game. The player realizes that he is famous and wonders if he should make friends with him. After all, he could make money. He asks Shinji what he wants from him, but their conversation is interrupted by the loan shark, who asks if the Stinker was looking for him. Takuya approaches, saying that even though he's a rank B player, he won't be influenced by bad decisions. The protagonist wonders if this weak guy is really rank B and guesses that he may have threatened the examiner. Shinji asks who he is, and the loan shark, angry, calls in a little girl. Takuya gets enraged and grabs the man by his tie, threatening him, saying he's strong. However, with a single movement, the man easily twists his arm. He places the loan shark on his knees while complaining of pain. A bit more seriously, Feeder says that with each passing minute, they are getting closer to destruction, so he doesn't have time to waste on him. Takuya storms off angrily, saying Shinji shouldn't cry and try to recruit him later. The man apologizes to the protagonist for the commotion, but Endu says it's fine as Takuya was a nuisance to him as well. The protagonist asks what he wants. After all, someone like him wouldn't have anything to say to a rank E. The man just laughs, calling him humble. Feeder says that the only reason he's rank E is because he refused to change classes. Laughing, the protagonist says that apparently the association is very loose-lipped. A bit awkwardly, the man says that with Japan's end drawing near, they can't afford to let their guard down. Shinji asks the protagonist what he thinks about working with them, offering the same amount they paid for the information. Looking at the check, Endu is shocked to see it was for 10 million yen. He says it's an amount he had some time ago, while internally he screams that he wants the money. The player returns the check, saying he doesn't want to join any guild. Shinji says that strong people really don't settle for less. With that, the Stinker makes another proposal, asking if Endu isn't interested in the information they have. He says that his guild is supported by government agencies and even other guilds around the world. Looking at him, the protagonist asks if they could find out who the player was that completed Prophecy Online. Smiling, Shinji says it's impossible after all. No one has completed that game. The protagonist, extremely irritated, says that in that case, he'll have to decline. The man becomes very afraid when he sees his reaction. He says it's fine, handing him a piece of paper, saying that if he changes his mind, he can contact him. As he leaves the place, the man wonders why he gave up so easily. He questions whether he was worried about tarnishing his guild's reputation by insisting too much, but he concludes it wasn't that. Shinji confesses that he was terrified, as if every part of his body was telling him not to get into trouble with such a monster. Causing the Stinker to nearly soil his pants, the protagonist pats him on the shoulder. Endu hands him a paper, leaving the man even more confused. He says that if he needs help, he can call him, and depending on the amount, he might accept. Taking the paper, still very nervous, the man thanks him for his kindness. Still disoriented, Shinji wonders who he really is. Later, at the headquarters of the Genesis Wings Guild, someone was walking hurriedly down the hallway. On the top floor, Feeder enters the guild master's office. He formally announces his return to the master. Suddenly, the master turns around, revealing herself to be a woman. She asks how it was to meet the newbie deemed the strongest by the association. Still a little nervous, Shinji says that he is genuinely a monster. Still trembling, he admits that the protagonist was the only player who made him feel fear through a conversation. With a terrifying look, the guild master asks who is stronger between her and Endu. He stammers, hesitating to answer. She says she'll take his silence as an answer while looking at the protagonist's file. Still very nervous, Shinji says he's sorry. Tsukino says he doesn't need to apologize, as his job is to relay all the information without hiding anything. The guild master says that among the 10 transcendent players, she is certainly the lowest ranked, and that it's not surprising that there are people stronger than her. She explains that the 10 transcendent players are the best from the beta test of Prophecy Online, those who receive a cash prize. Tsukino also informs that in a world where a game has become a reality, the appearance of someone powerful disrupts the hierarchy of power. She notes that since Shinji returned alone, it means the negotiation failed. He says that apparently the protagonist isn't interested in the information they possess, let alone the 10 million yen offered. With her arms crossed, she says that if Endu is truly one of the 10 transcendent players, fame and money will come to him in no time. She observes that there's no way for one of the 10 transcendent players to remain a rookie voluntarily. Tsukino says that on the other hand, there are hidden items that are extremely powerful but also come with side effects. She says that in any case, Feeder should continue to assess the man with his own eyes, and if his assessments are correct, he will surely become the strongest in the world. The master says that in all cases, the strongest person in the world could only be one of the 10 transcendent players, whose name is unknown. Nervous, Shinji asks if she is talking about first place. He informs her that even the United States looked for the data on the top 10 players. However, the data for number 1 was corrupted. Tsukino raises the possibility that the United States is lying about the number 1 data, secretly hiding them in their country. Shinji says he also believed the rumors, but after seeing Endu in person. Remembering the protagonist, Feeder says it's very likely that he really is number 1. The master says that for him to be saying this, it means there's a good chance they are right. Looking out the window, she says that Shinji must inform all members that hostile actions against Endu are strictly prohibited. She says that a nuclear bomb, which they don't know when it might explode, must be handled carefully. Still very nervous, he says he will do as instructed. On the other side of the city, in another large building, Endu says that a few weeks have passed and they were looking for places to use as a hideout for their source of income. He was looking at the view when suddenly someone called out to him. His subordinates were positioning the TV and asking for his opinion. Kaki presents him with a suitcase full of money, saying he managed to collect the taxes for the day. The protagonist praises him and asks how the attack group's preparation is going. He says they are easily leveling up in the underground sewers and making 1,000,000 yen a day. Excited, he informs that even the new recruits are making 100,000 yen per day. Extremely happy, the long-haired man says he never imagined making so much money while thanking the protagonist. The player reminds him that he said he would make the money. After all, if they make money, he profits too. He says that the taxes are practically fees for information. Kaki mentally thinks that paying 90% is really a lot, but without the information, he wouldn't even be able to make 10%. Looking at the protagonist, he realizes that this man has very valuable information. The long-haired man asks what they will do about the judgment since there are only 10 days left, and the reward is already at 400 million yen. The protagonist tells him that he will wait a bit longer. Suddenly, Endo's attention is drawn to the TV, which is broadcasting something. It showed the location of the test, informing that if they don't complete it in 10 days, Japan will be destroyed. Another presenter says that just like at the beginning, the situation seems hopeless. His colleague says they have new information. She announces that the Japanese government has stated that they will pay 1 billion yen to whoever manages to complete the test. Looking at the announcement, the player says that if they take too long, foreign guilds might try to intervene. Picking up a piece of clothing, he says that now is the best moment. He gets dressed, saying he'll go out for a bit, while the long-haired man asks if he's going alone. Endu says of course, after all, he can't put his source of income in danger. Everyone is fascinated by him. However, the 171 personality takes over, and he says it's 1 billion yen, and for that, he'll take everything. Kaki snaps back to reality, realizing that it's all about the money. It was already night when he finally arrived at the test location. There were many people in front of the gate that led to the test. The protagonist approached, while Shinji noticed his presence. As always, the player was calm as if he were going to a market. Happy, Feeder asked if he really came. Passing by him, Endu said he had no intention of cooperating. However, Shinji said that was a shame, as he wanted to make a profitable deal with him. He informed him that he just needed to transport some things for 100 million yen, making the protagonist pay full attention to him. Shinji led him to a space where hundreds of backpacks were. He said he wanted the protagonist to take one of those backpacks to his members inside the test. Curious, Endu asked what was inside them that made them worth 100 million yen. Shinji replied that they were provisions. Opening one of the backpacks, Endu noticed that it was full of supplies. He asked what this was, with Feeder saying they were the guild master's favorites. Shinji explained that they were in the deepest layer of the test, and because of that, they were running low on provisions. With a smile, the protagonist asked what the problem was. After all, with that amount, many people would accept. A little embarrassed, Shinji said that in fact they were in a difficult situation. Shinji informed him that he had asked 39 groups to help, but all of them were completely annihilated. The player began to say that the first 4 layers should only have formalities and wondered if it was different from the game. Still very nervous, the man concluded that he was sure Endu knew something. Shinji said that as far as they knew, they were the same as the game, but most people couldn't reach the 5th layer. Everyone who made it to the 5th layer was waiting for supplies. He also said that the only people who could call the 4th layer of formality were Endu and his guild master. While picking up the backpack, the protagonist asked if they were really that short on manpower, but either way, he was making money. Looking at Feeder, he asked if he would get a reward if he delivered it quickly. While grabbing his phone, he said he would talk to his superiors. Watching the man talk on his phone, Endu wondered how much money he could make with them. He informed the player that if he delivered it within a day, they would add 50 million more. Suddenly, Shinji heard a noise. It was the protagonist turning quickly while saying that he would be there in an hour. Inside the test, on the 3rd layer, some people were facing a giant insect. The man was trying to withstand the monster's attacks while being pressed to the ground. Still holding onto the creature, he told the woman to run, even if it was alone. She called out to him, pleading for him to come with her. Her husband smiled, looked back, thanked her for everything, and asked her to go. She screamed his name, stretching her arm, trying to reach him. Unexpectedly, the protagonist sliced through the insect, saying that they were in his way. The man fell to the ground in shock as the large monster's pieces crumbled around him. Still in shock, he couldn't understand how he was still alive, while his wife thanked Endu for saving them. But in the blink of an eye, the player was already far away, leaving the two behind, not understanding what had just happened. As the protagonist ran through the cave at an absurd speed, they continued to wonder if he was already gone. He finally reached the 5th layer, stopping his sprint. Endu realized it hadn't even taken an hour and concluded that these 150 million yen would definitely be profitable. But suddenly, he became confused upon noticing something. It was a man asking if he was Endu. Placing the backpack on the ground, the protagonist asked if the man was from the Genesis Wings, to which he confirmed. He said he brought the provisions that Shinji asked him to deliver. The man informed him that the payment had been deposited into his account as soon as he left, since Fader had assured them that he would deliver it. Opening his bank app, Endu saw that 150 million yen had indeed been transferred to his account. Satisfied, he simply thanked him for the deal. As various players appeared, their leader informed them that they had been waiting for food for a long time. They began to divide the provisions, saying that they were finally saved, while one of them said he would inform the front line. The protagonist said that it seemed horrible, while the leader responded affirmatively. He informed the player that they had already lost many people. Unexpectedly, many people started to run. They shouted that they would be caught. As they neared the camp, they said they were safe now, while the leader asked what had happened. But before they could answer, a loud noise echoed through the cave, causing pain to everyone. They looked ahead, where a large cloud of smoke was emerging. To everyone's surprise, a large swarm of giant insects was heading toward them. The protagonist was preparing to attack when suddenly, a huge flame passed by his side. Completely taken aback, the guild master passed by him, burning all the insects. After destroying them all, she stopped, her blades still surrounded by flames. The insect bodies fell, completely charred. Endu noticed that this was a high-level secret skill, the elemental sword Hellfire. The woman approached him, saying it was a pleasure to meet him. She thanked Endu for taking on the transport mission. As she sheathed her sword, she introduced herself as the guild master. Hey everyone, did you enjoy this story? I really liked it. If you want to follow the next part, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you in the next story, guys.